immediately smitten. Right away, I understood that it was brilliant, and in the presence of brilliance, I became involved in his campaign, and it was during the campaign, or during the summer of the campaign, that my father passed, and my father is everything to me, and so I wanted to, at some point, start a speaker series, and the one person I wanted to begin the speaker series, to be the first person to speak at it, was Senator Ted Cruz. He is an amazing individual, and I rarely, if ever, disagree with him, and I'm a political junkie. And it's a great privilege to have him here in Manhattan Beach.
Yep.
And Senator Cruz, please.
God bless Ted Cruz.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for inviting me to join you here tonight. And I'm particularly privileged to have the honor of giving the inaugural King Burstein Lecture in honor of your father and in honor of standing up and speaking out for liberty. And
What
let
is
me
it?
thank everyone here.
Okay.
When it comes to defending liberty,
Yeah.
California may not be the easiest place in the world.
Oh,
So
God.
I want to congratulate each of you
Yep.
for having the courage of your convictions,
Yep.
for having the courage to speak out. I do have a bit of good news, by the way.
What? Tell us.
After this gathering, as sort of a reward for your coming, Joe Biden will be giving back rubs. You will have to sign a liability waiver first, but that you can understand.
Just as long as he doesn't sniff my hair.
So I am thrilled to be here. And I'm thrilled to talk about, what Michael asked me to talk about is the American dream. And I don't know that there's a more important topic. The American dream to each of us, it means something different. But also at the same time, it's intertwined. Every one of us, we're the product of our family stories. We're the product of the journey of how we got here. And so I wanted to start by just sharing a little bit of my family story in a little bit more detail than you may know. Let me start with my mom. I've talked a lot about my dad. My mom sometimes gets annoyed that I talk so much about my dad. My mother will be like, "What, were you raised by wolves? Did you have a mother?" But my mother was born in Wilmington, Delaware. She's Irish and Italian. Working class family. Her mother was the second youngest of 17 kids.
Wow.
They were Irish Catholic. They didn't know what else to do on a Saturday night. My mom became the first person in her family ever to go to college. When she was in high school, her dad was transferred down to Houston. And she applied to the university that was a mile away, Rice University. And she ended up getting admitted. Now my mom's story, my grandfather, her dad, he was not an easy man. He was a drunk. And he didn't think women should get an education. And he especially didn't think his daughter needed to get an education. And my mother, who's been a best friend to me my whole life, she's 84 now. She stood up to her dad. She battled her dad. And she applied and got admitted to Rice. She ended up graduating from Rice University in 1956 with a degree in math. And she went and got a job at Shell as a computer programmer.
Wow.
Now pause and think for a minute about two industries that were not welcoming at all to women. Oil and gas and computer programming. And my mom was at the intersection of them both. Remember when I was a kid, my mom used to tell me how very deliberately didn't learn how to type. And she said, look, it was the 1950s. I understood the world I was living in. She said, I'd be walking down the hall at Shell and men would stop me and they'd say, sweetheart,
Oh.
would you type this for me?
Oh, wow.
And my mom wanted to be able to smile very sweetly and say, you know, I would love to help you out. But I don't know how to type. I guess you're going to have to use me as a computer programmer instead.
That's right.
My dad's story, my dad's from Cuba. Born in Cuba. Grew up in Cuba. When he was 14, my dad got involved with the Cuban Revolution. He was a kid. He was in student council. It's actually one of the remarkable things. You look at Fidel Castro, you look at the revolution, they were basically kids. Fidel Castro had been a student council leader. Now listen, I will readily admit I was on student council in high school. Nobody confused us with revolutionaries. But in Cuba, it was a bunch of kids. And my dad spent about 4 years fighting in the revolution. Fighting alongside Castro. Now, he didn't know Castro was a communist. Every once in a while, if I want to yank my dad's chain, I'll call him a communist gorilla. Takes him off. He's like, I was never a communist! But what he knew was that Batista, the dictator at the time, was a cruel and oppressive dictator. He was corrupt. He was in bed with the mob. And it was an oppressive government. As my dad describes the revolution at the time, he said it was a bunch of 14, 15-year-old boys who didn't know any better. When my dad was 17, Batista's police captured him. They found that he was in the revolution. They threw him in jail. They tortured my dad. They beat him nearly to death. I remember, now look, growing up, my father would never tell, he didn't like to tell stories about what exactly happened there. But I remember one time when I was a kid, one of his clients from the small business he owned came over for dinner. And he and I had just gone to see the movie Rambo. I don't know if anyone has seen Rambo. There's a scene in Rambo where they strap Sylvester Stallone to a bed frame and they put electricity and torture him. And my dad said, he said, you know, the Cubans, they weren't that fancy. When it came to torture, they didn't have all that elaborate technology. He said, the Cuban torturers, they just come in every couple of hours and just beat the living daylights out.
Oh my God.
So they beat him to the ground. An army officer stomped the back of his head with his boot.
Jesus.
Crushed my father's teeth out of his mouth. To this day, my dad has not had his front teeth because they were kicked out of his mouth in that jail cell. A couple days later, they let my dad go. And the head of that jail cell, he told my dad, he said, you know, we're going to follow you now. And if there's another bombing, if there's any other act from the revolution, we're holding you responsible. And they were following him to try to find the other revolutionaries. Now, at that point, my grandfather told my dad, said, look, they know who you are. They're just going to hunt you down and kill you now. You got to get out. So he applied to 3 U.S. universities. He applied to University of Miami, LSU, and University of Texas. UT let him in. That's how I came to be a Texan. So in 1957, my father got admitted to UT. He took a ferry boat from Cuba over to Key West. And he took a Greyhound bus from Key West all the way to Austin, Texas. He showed up in Austin, he's 18. He didn't know anybody. He couldn't speak English. And he had $100 that was sewn into his underwear. His first job was washing dishes. He made 50 cents an hour. Now, why did he start with that job? He started that job because he couldn't speak English. You didn't have to speak English to wash dishes. All you had to do was take a dish, put it under hot water, scrub it. He could do that in any language. But you know, my dad had a pretty profound incentive to learn English, because he was enrolled as a freshman in the University of Texas. His classes were in English. And if he didn't pass his classes, he'd flunk out. And if he flunked out, they'd revoke his student visa. If they revoked his student visa, they'd send him back home. And if they sent him home, they'd kill him.
Jesus.
So that was a fairly acute incentive. My dad was going to learn English and learn it quickly.
Right.
So he did a couple of things. One of the things my dad did, he took Spanish 101. He signed up for Spanish 101. He basically reverse engineered it. So when the professor said, milk is leche, my dad would be like, oh, okay, leche is milk. Okay, good. And he'd just do it backwards. And the other thing he'd do is he'd go to movies. Every Saturday he'd go see a movie, and he'd sit and watch the same movie 3 times in a row. The human mind is a remarkable thing where you just, as you're sitting and listening to it, you could pick up context, and he began to learn English. And you know, the journey of it is, once he learned English, his next job was as a cook, same restaurant. But a cook made 80 cents an hour. He liked the cook job much better than dishwasher. He didn't have hands that were scalding red from the hot water. He enjoyed that much better. His next job after that was as a teaching assistant at UT, teaching math to undergrads.
Wow.
And his next job after that was as a computer programmer at IBM. And my dad went on to start a small business with my mom, a seismic data processing company, the oil and gas business. And today my dad's a pastor. He travels across the country preaching the gospel.
Wow.
Now, in 1957, when my father was in Austin, he was still a revolutionary. He understood Batista was corrupt, so he actually went around, as he learned English, he went around speaking at Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs and other sort of groups in and around Austin, speaking about the revolution, speaking about the need to topple Batista.
Yes.
Well, 1959, the revolution succeeds. Castro declares he's a communist to the world.
Oh, boy.
Begins seizing people's lands, begins executing dissidents. My father went back to Cuba and saw what happened. 1960. He looked around and saw the oppression. He became utterly horrified. His kid sister, my Tia Sonia. All right, my Tia Sonia is beyond a fireball. In my family, if you look, I am by far the quietest and most mild-mannered. Then there's my father. Then there's my Tia Sonia. My Tia Loca, as I call her. But she was still in Cuba after Castro succeeded. And she saw the oppression that Castro was putting in place. So my Tia Sonia fought in the counter-revolution. She fought against Castro.
Right.
And my Tia Sonia ended up being imprisoned and tortured by Castro's gangs. She went through unspeakable horrors in a Cuban jail as a teenager. I'm not sure exactly how long. But it was, she fled Cuba ultimately in the early 60s. She came to Texas. My father, when he saw what had happened, he sat down, he made a list of every place he'd go to speak. And he went back in front of them, and he stood in front of them, and he said, I misled you. I came in front of you, and I urged you to support Castro's revolution. He said, I was mistaken. I didn't do so knowingly. I didn't know who they were and what they were doing. But he said, for that, I'm truly sorry. Now, just a week ago, I took my whole extended family down to South Padre Island on the Texas coast. We went fishing, celebrating my dad's 80th birthday. Caught the most enormous red snapper you have ever seen. My whole life, my dad has been my hero. But you know what's I find most incredible about his story? How commonplace it is. Every one of us here, we've got a story just like that. Some of us, it may be us. Some of us, it may be our parents. Some of us, it may be our great-great-great-grandparents. But if you look at the history of America, we're a nation formed by people coming seeking freedom. The entire history of America has been a journey towards freedom. It's almost like you engaged in a giant social experiment. For centuries, let's take people from all over the globe. And by the way, our ancestors, they weren't the richest, they weren't the smartest, they weren't the most powerful. Our ancestors were the people crazy enough to risk everything for freedom. For centuries, sort from across the globe, give me the people who value freedom above everything else, and let's bring them to this new land called America. That's the American dream. That journey towards freedom. And even in a nation that was born with the original sin of slavery, for which we fought a horrific civil war that ripped this country asunder to pay the price of that sin. The story of America has been a journey towards freedom.
Yes.
It has been a journey from captivity and bondage towards freedom. That's the American dream. You know, you think about it across the globe. There's no other place on earth that so many people can start with nothing and achieve anything. That's fundamentally what the American dream is about, is that you or I or anybody else, whatever your dreams, this is a land where you can achieve. And actually, California, you look at the history of the state of California, people came to California to achieve their dreams. There's gold in them there hills. That's the journey of this country. So we find ourselves today at a pivotal time in our country's history. A fundamental debate about who we are, where we are headed, and what the American dream means going forward. And what I want to do for everyone here is just encourage you. Encourage you that the beautiful thing about eternal truths
Yes.
is they're always true.
Yep.
And I want to encourage everyone here two things. Speak the truth
Amen.
and have fun.
Yeah, yes.